So a few days ago, we took a look at the new premium F-2A ADTW, and since by now a lot of you who bought it have probably made pretty significant progress on the Japanese tech tree, I figured it was about time to take a look at its tech tree counterpart, the F-2A. These aircraft are, as you'd probably expect, quite similar in a lot of ways, and I do apologize if there's a bit of overlap with the information I share here, but the difference in battle rating and primary armament is definitely going to change the way you play it quite significantly. This video will also give me a great opportunity to talk a bit about the current state of ARB, especially regarding the new C5 AMRAAMs that have just been added to a bunch of aircraft, and how they stack up against other missiles you'll commonly encounter, since it seems like there's quite a bit of confusion over the effectiveness of these missiles. Regarding the F-2A though, this is a very interesting 13.7 aircraft in that, while it possesses a few extremely significant drawbacks, it also has a number of characteristics which allow it to beat up on even 14.0s in certain situations. I don't find this to be a very good vehicle for getting high kill games though, mostly for the obvious reason that it only carries 4 BVR missiles, whereas you have other aircraft like the F-18s and the Su-30s flying around carrying 10 or 12. While having only 4 Fox 3s is a bit annoying, the most serious drawback this thing faces is the lack of a helmet-mounted sight. This is by far the most significant issue with this aircraft and will definitely reduce your overall effectiveness, since you can't just point and click on targets when you want to attack them the way you can with a lot of other jets at this BR. It's not impossible that it will get one in the future, since if I'm not mistaken, one of the Eurofighter variants we have wasn't actually fitted with an HMS system due to budget reasons, even though it could have theoretically gotten one, but we got it anyways in-game for obvious balance reasons. On this aircraft though, given what the win rates look like, I wouldn't hold my breath. On the other hand though, let's talk a little bit about the F-2A's strengths. First off is its BVR armament, the AAM-4. These missiles are a little bit gimped right now. In real life they have about 50% more range than an A-series AMRAAM, but in-game currently they actually have just slightly less range overall. That being said, they do actually accelerate a little bit faster, so out to around 20 to 25 kilometers depending on your altitude, it will actually reach its target slightly before the AMRAAM will. Once the burner cuts out though, its higher drag coefficient will result in it slowing down more quickly. One other area where it rather surprisingly outperforms the AMRAAM despite being a larger and heavier missile is actually close range turning. You see, though it pulls slightly fewer Gs than the AMRAAM, it also has fins which can pull about 50% more AOA, which essentially means it requires less speed to reach its maximum G load than the AMRAAM does. And speaking of the AMRAAM, in case you've been wondering about that new C5 variant, while it may have greater overall range compared to the A version, it also accelerates up to that range rather slowly, so unless you're firing from like 35 kilometers or more, it's actually going to be worse in nearly all situations compared to the A. So basically, the AAM-4, the A and B AMRAAMs, which are identical by the way, and the C5 AMRAAMs are functionally all sort of side grades to one another, with each one being better at short, medium, and long range than its counterparts respectively, but overall they're all relatively comparable in terms of effectiveness. And next, of course, I have to mention the AAM-3, the IR missiles, which I spent plenty of time glazing in the last video, but I'll go over them again for those of you who haven't seen it. The AAM-3 is to the AIM-9M what the AIM-7F is to the AIM-7E. While they might look rather similar in terms of what they do and how they function, the gap in capability is absolutely ludicrous. Compared to the AIM-9M, the AAM-3 features 10 Gs more pull, and also it has an incredibly low drag coefficient, which makes it hardly slow down over distance even once its burner cuts out, which gives it by far the longest maximum range of any comparable IR missile in the game right now, even the Python 3 and the PL-8B. The hilarious range of these IR missiles will definitely help you compensate for the F-2A's lack of BVR weaponry, especially if you can catch people who are flying at treetop level and don't notice your presence above them. And then of course there's the airframe. This is basically an F-16C with 25% more surface area on its wings and tail. This will somewhat reduce your maximum speed, but in turn gives you massively increased lift and maneuverability. As a consequence of this, the F-2A is, at the time of this recording, the third best aircraft in the game for dogfighting, and assuming skill level between pilots is equal, it will only lose to the Eurofighter and the Rafale. That being said, lots of the people who play those two aircraft don't know what they're doing, and I've had plenty of occasions where I've managed to slip in behind those aircraft by simply cutting my afterburner and popping my air brake, so don't assume it's a lost cause even if you run into one of them. Keeping all that in mind, what's the best way to play this aircraft? Well, unlike its premium counterpart, I don't really find that positioning is quite as important, You are going to want to go around the left side of the map and climb a bit, though staying below contrail height, of course, but I don't find that the specifics really make that much of a difference. And the main reason for that is simply because you are going to get launched on at the start of the match nearly 90% of the time, so it's pretty much a given that you're going to have to either notch the missile or try to shake it kinematically, which is going to cost you both energy and positioning. If you've picked up enough speed and altitude, you should have more than enough energy to do this, and unless it's a Fokker 90 or something, even just turning in the opposite direction and flying at full speed will usually be enough to bleed the missile of its energy, though to be clear, this is not the ideal way to do this, of course. Also, during the opening stages of the match while you're climbing, I would strongly recommend that unless for whatever reason there are no allies around you, that you do not launch any of your radar missiles until after the initial BVR exchange has taken place. This is because even if it looks like you have a solid shot on someone, generally at least one of your teammates will have fired a shot off also, and given you only have 4 Fox 3s, you're not doing yourself any favors by blowing a quarter of your BVR firepower for one pot shot. Instead, you want to position yourself above and behind your team, especially the big glob of them that will be flying around at treetop height, and basically act as a sort of counterpunch your aircraft. You see, the enemy team is going to eventually start closing in on your teammates, and when that happens, you want to put yourself in a position to start launching on them once they get into visual range. You're very well equipped to deal with these often low-flying targets, since your AAM-4s have a very large warhead, which can cause splash damage to people attempting to use multipathing as cover, and your AAM-3s are of course immune to multipathing, plus having Seeker shut off IRCCM, they're basically immune to pre-flaring as long as the enemy isn't maneuvering too hard. Also, you do have a very good radar with TWS+, which will allow your radar to actually identify the target for you even if it's not within visual range, and this will give you a huge advantage in situational awareness once both teams have crossed the midpoint of the map and everyone starts to scatter all over the place. And that really sums up this aircraft's biggest talent, which is playing defensively and reactively and staying vigilant to defend your teammates from above once the enemy starts closing into closer range. Having this airframe also helps too, since any aircraft unfortunate enough to get sucked into a dogfight with one of your teammates while you're around is going to have a very difficult time winning a 2v1 when an F2 is involved. Just be very cautious and conservative with your weapons. Despite the F-2A's great airframe, being stuck with nothing but guns in a 13.7 match is not really the best position to find yourself in, so make sure that any shots you do take are very strong ones, preferably from within less than 15 kilometers if possible with your AAM-4s, and within 4 kilometers for the AAM-3s, though it can't be much further than that if they're either heading towards you or stalled out. Lastly, if your match ends up coming down to a handful of enemies on each team, or even a 1v1, do everything you can to try and bait your enemy into getting closer to you, especially if you can get them within dogfighting range. The best way to accomplish this is, if possible, to find some sort of large piece of hard cover like a mountain or some buildings, put yourself behind it, and essentially force the enemy to merge with you by making them fly over top of it. Usually your IR missiles will be enough to deal with people if you can slip onto their 6, but it seems like a lot of people aren't yet aware of this thing's dogfighting capabilities, so I find no shortage of victims who decide they want to engage me in a turn fight either. Anyways guys, just a quick reminder that if you have a vehicle you want to see me cover, or want to have input on what vehicles I cover in future updates, please consider taking a look at my channel's membership program for these and some other perks, as it really helps me out quite a lot. Otherwise, check out the playlist in the description for more similar content, and I'll see you guys in the next one.